The problem to come in and speak a little bit after Dr. Swami is that one, he's a hard act to follow, and second, he stole most of the lines that I had to make. So unlike his usual presence on TV when he's in a debate, I have to say this is quite different. I actually agree with almost everything I heard him say. So Dr. Swami, Dr. Howard Thomas, Dr. Dholakia, and Samit Agnihotri, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here at the Indian Management Conclave, which is not just meeting and spending time interacting with each other, but is genuinely producing a piece of work which we hope will go on and help India become a more meaningful nation. I would say the responsibility is not just to produce a document for management education. It is to produce a document for education. And since the subject is looking at India in 2025, I think it's useful to go back a little bit in history and see what's actually happened here in the last 25 years. We've seen dramatic change take place in India as a nation, both internally, the way we look at ourselves, and also the way the world looks at us. For a long time, since we became independent, we were constantly looking for an excuse as to why India cannot do better. We had plenty of derogatory terms that started to get used. The Hindu growth rate was a term which was actually not used kindly for India. And then people used to say, Indians do well, but India does not. If you look at Indians outside of India, in almost any sphere of life, doctors, lawyers, scientists, technologists, pretty much across the board. If there were no doctors in the UK, the NHS would collapse completely. If there were no doctors in North America, incidentally, I was talking to a friend of mine who's, they have an association of doctors there, and he was telling me of the renowned or the most successful doctors. The single largest, most successful ethnic community is Indians. You can see them in Germany, you can see them even in places where English is not spoken, like Italy and Germany, and of course in the US, UK, Canada. So what happened here within the country? The genetic pool is the same. And by the way, India as a nation, if you go back, we are an 8,000-year-old civilization. And if you look at what India did, and a lot of this is recorded history, some is hearsay, but clearly this is a nation which was on the forefront of science, research, technology, systems like navigation, even cosmetic surgery. I'm told even the button, incidentally, was first made in India. Games like chess started here. So a lot of intellectual activity, a lot of commercial and business activity. At the end of the Mughal period, when the British came to India, India as a single nation had 21% world trade, one nation. And Great Britain, as it was then called, had 1% world trade. In 1947, when they left here, Great Britain had 21% world trade share. What do you think was that here? It's 1%. It was a complete economic subjugation. And what is sometimes dismaying is that when we did become independent, we did some very smart things, by the way, don't get me wrong. I don't mean to run everything down because we have done some fantastic work. In the early days, the leadership of the nation assumed, probably rightfully then, that it is only the public sector which can build the economy of India. Therefore, the large projects like dams, power plants, steel plants would be set up in the public sector. And the private sector, which did not have resources, would set up small and mid-sized enterprises. and a certain set of controls which were inherited from British times as a bureaucracy, which were then prevalent, were not just changed, they were actually strengthened. People say British left the bureaucracy here. We made a fine art of it ourselves. Today, Indian bureaucracy, well, maybe today is not a good measure. If you go back a little bit, 20 years ago, Indian bureaucracy was considered amongst the most obstructive in the world. Of all nations who wanted to build free markets. So what happened in the early 90s was quite interesting. Actually, the reform did not start in the early 90s. For those of whom know, and I'm sure Dr. Swami does, the work actually started in the 80s. In the mid-80s, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi raised some very interesting questions. He's saying, I don't understand what we are doing. And I think he had the advantage of not coming from the political background. Well, political legacy of the family, but individually, he had no interest in politics. He said, I'm going to use common sense. Look at what's going on in India. We have so many young people. Indians understand technology. The world is moving ahead with technology. What's wrong with us? Why are we not doing this? Indian industry is completely looking inwards. It wants to be protected all the time. It wants tariff barriers to be high so nobody can come in here and create competition. So he pushed both the government internally and industry to take a hard look at this situation and said, what can we do to change this situation? He even forced the government to buy computers for every secretary. So it was actually interesting. Every secretary got a computer. And many of them, the desk was in the front. The computer used to sit at the back. So in the morning they would come, take off the cover, switch it on, and then turn around and work in the normal desk. So it became more in form rather than being used as a tool to create better decision making. Then we got pushed to a corner. In 91, we began what was popularly called the administrative and financial reform of India. Fortunately, we were able to implement this quickly because we had a lot of the work already being done at that time. And again, the biggest resistance actually to this at that point in time came from industry. Many people in industry said, this is not right. We're not prepared. You, Mr. Government, have constrained our growth all along. You've not allowed us to grow. You've not allowed accumulation of any resources. At one time, by the way, our tax rates were 97%. And interestingly, if you added on the other duties and taxes you paid, it was over 100%. I'm surprised that people question, how did India develop a parallel economy? People thought, am I stupid? What am I working for? If I'm going to earn 10 rupees and pay 12 to the government, I must be off my head. So a complete parallel economy got established in India, and it became deep-rooted. It became part of the system. So when in the early 90s, the duties, taxes started to go down, the permissions and the role of places like the CCI, Udyog Bhavan started to go down, where the major friction was. So what the government had done, we borrowed the 5-year plan system from the GOTS plan, from then USSR. And we put everything, all economic and industrial activity, on permission and licensing route. Is that okay, Mr. Agarwal? I'm not talking only on education, but is this of interest? Or, I'm kind of trying to lead up to something, but this is becoming a long story. So, as I said, Dr. Swami stole half my lines, so I'm trying to think of new stuff to say now. And the only reason I'm mentioning all of this is, we were earlier a free nation, we were a trading nation, we were a very globalized nation. We bound ourselves into this, we locked ourselves up into this box. So when this opened up, after the first initial resistance, industry found, by the way, this is fantastic. I can grow. I can grow to whatever my capacity is, and then beyond. I can actually go to my capability, not just my capacity. And many said, by the way, why should we limit ourselves to our capabilities? We will look outside for new ideas, new technology, some innovation, but we still did not start focusing on research. We were coming from an environment where everything was controlled in terms of capacity. Whatever you made was going to get sold. If it cost you 10 rupees, you charged 12. If your cost went up to 12, you charged 14. And that's the way it was. And you created clear classes of people. You created classes amongst the population of this nation. We already had a bias built in, part of it coming through history. But the biases, some of them actually got stronger. Some went away. And over time, I think as a nation, some of the biases we've developed, we have a gender bias, we have a language bias, we have a geographical bias, we have an activity bias, we have a whole host of them. I'm not even talking about the caste right now, by the way, because that is a historic one that in some manner we are still living with that as our history. The beauty was what was happening in the world around us as we started to open up. Technology and communication changed the way the world behaved. It changed the way intellect and intelligence was applied to business. Capital resource was of course important, but it became less important. It was not the only driving force which would decide which business, which company, which industry and which segment would become larger and would be considered global or world class and which would not. You had startups coming out of garages, turning into giant organizations, which changed the way the world did business. Even today, if you see, there are some very interesting secular trends taking place, which are going to change the world in the year that you're talking about. Somewhere I read 2025. Was it on this or in one of the notes? The world will look quite different. Interestingly, if you look back, even just within India, at the list of the top 20, top 50 or top 100 Indian companies, then you look at the list of the top 20 Indian companies today. It's very revealing. I'd recommend for all of you to go back and look at these two lists. It's quite interesting what has happened. There were these large organizations which looked like they were there for life. And suddenly, overnight, some of them just went away. They could not stand the heat. The heat which came from the intense competition which got fired up as you started opening India up. And this was only partial opening, by the way. Today, if you look at India now, in just a few months, something dramatic has happened. I got invites. I was discussing with Dr. Preetham Singh only a couple of days back. I got invites from 6 major global events to come and address them in the next 2 months. They haven't suddenly fallen in love with me. It's just that they think India has become suddenly a nation you need to watch out for. You need to take notice of them again. And so people across the globe are sitting up and taking notice as to what's going on here. We've always said India had great potential. In fact, we used to talk of India's greatness with its long, distant past or its potential. Almost all the time that I can remember in the last 30, 40, 50 years, that's the way India used to be described. A country with great potential, great promise. Who's going to realize this for us? If we do not make that move ourselves, there's nobody out there who's looking to help us. And why should they? Many see us as competition. Some see us as complementary. Increasingly, as I said, the change that is taking place in the world because of technology is there is an increasing realization there is a global value chain getting established. If you can ensure that you are part of this global value chain, first, your place in the community of nations is ensured. We are, however, now let me come to the little bit of the not so negative side. We are trying to do something which has never been done in this world. There is no billion people democracy in the world. It's trying to turn itself into a market economy. There is no blue book written for us. We are actually experimenting. We are writing this blue book every single day. And by the way, forget a billion people. What we are doing has never ever been done before. There's no country with full civil liberties which has turned itself into a market economy in that order. Not one. Not Japan, not US, not UK, not Korea, not one other nation in the world. Poland is the only one which kind of comes close to what we are doing now. So when people say, why are you guys so slow? Why can you not work like China? In China, a decision gets made today and implementation starts tomorrow. In India, a decision gets made today and a debate starts tomorrow. And the debate could be a week. A debate could be 6 years. And we've seen that happen too. We've seen political parties in opposition saying this is a very good thing, we must do this, we must do this, we must do this, the government is blocking this. The moment they get into government, saying, by the way, we can't do this. It's not okay. And vice versa. The same thing has happened with parties who are in government trying to implement some rule, regulation, law or act. The moment they're in opposition, they find 20 reasons why it's not a good idea for India or Indians. I wish more Indians would actually say what's actually good for them. One good thing that's happening is Indians have started to go out and vote. I think this is a fantastic thing. Partially driven by the young people who are coming into vote, partially driven by the phenomenal communication that is taking place, telling people that you do have a role. The other interesting thing we found, I am going to come, by the way, at some point to education. And the reason I'm saying this is, all of this is relevant to you. That is what our education needs to realize. It's not something in an ivory tower sitting outside of real life. That's one of the things we are attempting to change. Some of you may know we've actually set up a new university which is going to start classes in, I think, the next 7 or 8 days. We have a first cohort starting off in a week. And I'm happy to share with you some of the things we are doing there. We have over 100 innovations in that university from any other university in the world. And the only attempt is, how do you build people who will be innovative, who will provide leadership, no matter what role they play, by the way. They could be in civil society, politics, movie stars, business leaders, and will be driven to do the right thing. So compulsory credits on subjects like ethics and moral dilemma. If you don't earn that credit, you will not get a degree. Compulsory credits on soft skills. Because sometimes you cannot, brilliant minds in India, we have such fantastic engineers, but if you try and have a conversation with them, it's hard for them to communicate for 6 minutes. And it's nothing wrong with them. It's just the exposure they've had. Because the mind is fantastic. Our mind, as Dr. Swami said, is absolutely phenomenal. You know, people talk of telekinesis and stuff like that. It is real. It's not hocus pocus. It's not magic. If you think back, what were the Indian saints and sages doing? Not today. 200, 300, 500, 5,000 years ago. Levitation. It is purely projection of your mind beyond your physical body. And I think, by the way, it's all teachable. It's learnable. The human, the human attention span is actually only 9 minutes. So this is a lousy job I'm doing of going way beyond 9 minutes to talk to you. Because the moment you go beyond 9 minutes, people will start switching off. And you can see this. I can see it in this audience. There will be people, some will hold it a little bit longer. But 9 minutes is not the norm, which is why if you see, many advertising gurus will tell you what you can do, how you need to make the maximum impact in the first 15 seconds, and then the 30 seconds, and then 60 seconds, and then stop. So there's research now to show that if you are testing people at the end of the semester or the term of the year, or you're teaching them something and testing them right away, their ability to retain stuff from the short-term memory into the long-term, if they've been tested, is 20 times higher than if they were tested only at the end. And the reason I'm saying this is, our universities, our educational institutions, our business schools need to understand this. If what you have taught is only learned by rote, frankly, we must stop teaching. Because there's so much more to learn outside. There's such fantastic exposure available in India, both from within India and outside. Teaching by rote in effect, is doing what India did. We're tying ourselves down in a box. And it's a shame that we hear school kids saying, I cannot write this different. And I've had this conversation with a niece of mine. She's a very, very bright mind. She's saying, I know the answer to this, but this is what I have to write because this is what the teacher in school has said. What a shame, I thought. Somebody cannot be innovative, be creative, use your mind to solve or fix a problem. What good is our teaching? What good is our management? I want to bring back one more comment which was made by Dr. Swami. One of the reasons California has been successful as a startup, or Israel is successful as a startup, or parts of Cambridge have become, and we have not in India. Part of it is cultural. We look at failure as an individual's failure. In those two places that I mentioned, those three places, failure is seen as the biggest learning opportunity. In California, if you go for funding, you had 2 or 3 startups which have failed. Guaranteed you will get funding. Almost guaranteed. Quicker than a first-timer who has not failed. Of course, somebody who's been successful also gets funding. But in India, we actually beat down people who failed. So we did something in our companies many, many years ago. We started a process. We said, look, none of us in the management, in the shareholders, in senior executives have all the answers. There's just no chance we'll have all of the answers ourselves. So we did 2 things extensively. One, we partnered extensively with organizations outside, and I don't mean outside of India only, but outside of our organization. The Honda partnership, of course, got known quite well because of the product and the way it was advertised. But we had many, many others. We had at one time about 20 partnerships. We were very fortunate that majority of them were successful for our partners and for them, because we got into them with the frame of mind we're going to learn from each other. And by the way, if there's a difference of opinion, as is going to happen, this is real life. Many, many times we had differences of opinion. We said, let's not do what's in our interest and what's our perspective. Let's not do what's yours. Let's see what's good for this baby that both of us worked on. If you can do that, actually a lot of issues get resolved. Second thing we did extensively was we encouraged people within the organization to experiment all the time. And I mean all the time, by the way. Knowing fully well, when you experiment so much, not everything will work. Some things will work, some will work wonderfully, and some will fall flat on their face. So what we began was a monthly exercise where people who had given new ideas, new things that had worked, were called up on stage and recognized, given a pat on the back. And by the way, at the same time, on the same stage, those people who tried and failed were also called and given the exact same recognition. Because they had a bigger effort to make in future. If they recognize that by making the effort, I'm doing the right thing, they would continue. If they were fired or somebody jumped down their neck, say, why would I do all this? Because you don't incentivize. There was no cash incentive in any of these, by the way. It was purely recognition of your intellect and your attempt and your drive. One of the things I think we need to do in India in our business schools, you need to tell me how much time I've got now. 5 minutes. Okay. One of the things I think all our business schools need to do, I should tell you at one time, I called some of our senior executives, I'm talking some years ago, and said, first, we should stop hiring the gold medalist from any business school, and second, we should stop hiring from most business schools. And the reason for that was that we saw graduate after graduate after graduate coming out of business schools with the attitude, oh, by the way, I have all the answers. You guys who worked 20 years, who are oldies, frankly, you don't have a clue. You don't know what's going on. That was not just disruptive in the organization, it was downright disrespectful and discouraging for people to work. I think the biggest role any good business school can play is two. One is give people the tools, not the answers, but the tools to look for and find the answers for themselves. Every single time when you go out, the problem is going to be different. That's real life. Second, I think there is too much focus in India on jobs. I think we need to focus a lot more also on entrepreneurship, people who can actually create jobs. Not just, and I'm not turning down jobs by the way, they are absolutely essentially required to run enterprise in India. But at the same time, I don't think we are producing enough entrepreneurs right now. We need to encourage that. We need to give free rein to entrepreneurship. We need to figure out a way, how do you build the world's largest nursery for new enterprises? Even funding is not available today. Risk capital is not available in India easily. We used to have developmental financial institutions, IDBI, ICICI, IFCI, that was the role. We took that away. We turned them into commercial banks, almost. And already there was not enough VCs here. Fortunately, the private equity players from overseas came in and started an industry where now Indian players are getting in. Angel funds. We are the only country in the world, by the way, which taxes when you invest in an angel fund. When the angel fund invests in a company, you get taxed. Every other country, you not only not get taxed, you actually get an incentive. Please do more of this. This is what we need as a nation. So this is something I cannot for the life of me comprehend. Why would a nation which needs to create these 10 million jobs over and over and over again do this? Why would you not say we need millions of more entrepreneurs to go out and create tens of millions of new jobs? And by the way, it is small enterprises that create jobs. It's not the large enterprises. Large enterprises create the system, they create branding, they create technology, they create process, they help mid-sized and small enterprises to grow. But the jobs, the products, the exports, all of it takes place in the SMEs. I wish more business schools would start to focus on how do you make the SMEs more effective, more efficient, more forward-looking. How do we create business, family business in India? There's not enough focus on improving the state of family business in India, where the bulk of business is actually family business. There's not enough study around about this. So I'm going to stop here. I've actually gone way beyond my brief. Only just to say that the biggest gap that we have in India right now is training, skills and education. The rest is only left to our imagination. If we can focus and improve the quality of education that we have in India, we need to do both. We need to increase our reach. It is much, much too small right now. Only 18% of graduates get into universities, whereas even in a country like China, it's 26. Brazil is 36%. It's double what we do. So our target, I believe, is some 30% enrollments. If you get to 30% enrollments, you need to create 40 million more seats, by the way, today in India. And you'll still be 100 million short of what you need to educate all of India. So let's think about this a little bit. We need to increase both the quantity of what we are doing, and we need not teach only in classes. We need to create people who understand what goes on in real life post-education. Therefore, an experiential learning, I think, would be a great service to mankind if all of you can do that. Incidentally, again, I'm going back for just 1 minute to the university that we are setting up, which is called BML Munjal University. We have built the world's highest experiential learning content right from day one. It's going to be up to 35, 36% in some of the programs, but it's there in every program. If you want to be an engineer, you have to learn some liberal arts as well. If you want to be a management student, you have to learn some technology as well. You want to give people lots of exposure, and we will have actual executives coming in and teaching in classes. We will have students working almost full-time with companies to be interned to learn from them. We want them to go out and to interact at the point where you can start to say, by the way, if I don't do this, I am just falling behind. I'm just doing what everybody else is doing. Therefore, innovation, leadership, enterprise, but done with a sense of responsibility, with a sense of ethics, and understanding that we live in a country where 250 million people don't get 2 square meals a day. It is incumbent upon us, all of us, therefore, we are absolutely blessed. We didn't do anything to be born in the families, at least not that we know of, to be born in the families we were born in, to got the kind of opportunities we got. We therefore have this responsibility to create the growth which will allow us to improve the lot of every Indian, but not just look at ourselves as Indians, look at ourselves as global citizens. Thank you very much and good luck.